Story 1. Opening confession: when I was a kid, being home alone felt like a small promotion. It meant trust. It meant I was old enough to microwave my own dinner and lock the doors without being reminded. Most of the time, it was exactly that: quiet afternoons, background noise from the TV, the ordinary creaks of a house settling into evening. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. But there are a few nights that never really left me. I don't mean ghost stories or shadows with red eyes. I've never believed in that kind of thing. What I remember feels worse in a way because it was normal. It was my house, my neighborhood. Familiar walls and light switches I could reach without thinking. And still, something about those nights felt wrong. I didn't understand it then. I told myself I was being paranoid, that houses make sounds, that phones glitch, that motion lights flip on for no reason. Even now, years later, I can explain most of it, at least on paper. I just can't explain why I still check the locks 3 times before I go to bed. Story 1. The quiet afternoon. The first time something felt off, it started like any other weekday. I was 9, maybe 10, old enough to walk home from the bus stop by myself, young enough that my parents still called the house phone every afternoon to make sure I'd made it inside. Our neighborhood was quiet in the most boring way possible: trimmed lawns, mailboxes that all looked the same, dogs that barked at nothing and then forgot why they started. I remember the routine clearly because it never changed. I'd drop my backpack by the stairs, kick off my shoes near the kitchen tile, and head straight for the pantry, usually crackers or a granola bar. I was lucky; there'd be leftover pizza wrapped in foil. The house always smelled faintly like laundry detergent, and whatever my mom had cooked the night before felt lived in. Safe. The TV in the living room stayed on most afternoons. Not because I was watching it closely, but because the noise made the house feel occupied. Sitcom reruns, commercials, the low hum of dialogue bleeding into the hallway. Silence back then felt bigger than it does now. Our house wasn't large, but it had enough corners to feel private. The kitchen opened into the living room, and a narrow hallway led to the bedrooms upstairs. From the couch, I could see the sliding glass door that faced the backyard. That door had a lock that worked technically, but it never latched with a clean click. You had to push it hard and lift slightly, or it would sit there looking closed without actually catching. My dad complained about it for years. I think he liked having small repairs to postpone. Most days I didn't think about it. That afternoon was bright and unremarkable. Sunlight came in through the blinds in thin stripes across the carpet. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating crackers straight from the sleeve, watching a show I can't even name now. Every so often I'd glance toward the backyard out of habit. The fence was high, the gate usually padlocked. Beyond it, just another row of houses that looked like ours. The phone rang around 4. My mom, checking in like always. I told her I was fine, that I'd started my homework, even though I hadn't. She reminded me to keep the doors locked, said I would. I remember hanging up and actually looking toward the sliding door, just to be sure. It looked shut. The handle was down. From where I sat, that was enough. There was nothing dramatic about that afternoon. No storm clouds rolling in. No strange cars idling outside. It's just a quiet house holding the heat of the day. The soft murmur of television voices in me, assuming that because everything looked normal, it was. The sound upstairs, it started as something small enough to ignore. I was still on the floor in front of the TV when I heard it, just a dull shift from above. A soft thud like someone setting something down carefully. I remember glancing toward the ceiling without really thinking about it. Houses make noises, ours always had. The wood would pop when the temperature changed. Pipes would knock inside the walls. My dad used to call it the house stretching. So I turned my attention back to the TV. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time it wasn't a thud. It was a sequence. Slow, measured. A step, then another. Not heavy enough to shake the ceiling, but deliberate enough that it didn't blend into the usual background creaks. I muted the TV without meaning to. The sudden quiet felt bigger than the sound itself. Nothing. I stayed still, listening. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove past outside, but upstairs was silent. I told myself I'd imagined the pattern. When you're alone, your brain fills gaps. That's what I thought anyway. I unmuted the TV, but I raised the volume just a little higher than before, not enough to admit I was nervous. Just enough to drown out anything subtle. The third time was clearer. 3 steps. Slow. Evenly spaced. Directly above the living room, which meant the hallway outside my bedroom. Felt it in my chest before I processed it in my head. The sound stopped the moment I looked up again, like it had been waiting for me to notice. I remember standing halfway up from the floor, just hovering there. My first instinct was to call my mom back. I grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen counter and checked the screen. Low battery. 1 blinking bar. I hesitated, then set it down, annoyed more than afraid. Instead, I considered going upstairs. That part still bothers me. I actually took 2 steps toward the staircase. I even put my hand on the railing. The house felt different in that moment. Not louder, just aware. Like if I climbed those stairs, I'd be stepping into something I wasn't ready to see. I told myself it was stupid. If someone were really up there, I would have heard the door open. I would have heard something break. There were no alarms. No crashing noises. Just footsteps that stopped whenever I paid attention. I backed away from the stairs. I sat back down in front of the TV, volume higher now, pretending to watch. But I didn't look away from the hallway for the rest of the afternoon. Story 1. The open door. By the time my parents got home, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. The TV was still on. My homework was half finished on the coffee table. I didn't mention the footsteps right away because saying it out loud would make it sound childish. Houses creak with shifts. That's what I kept telling myself. My dad did his usual routine when he came in. Keys on the counter, quick glance through the kitchen, checking the back door out of habit. I remember hearing him pause. "Did you open this?" I turned around. The sliding glass door wasn't wide open, but it wasn't sealed either. It was sitting just slightly off the frame, maybe an inch or 2, enough that a thin line of outside air slipped through the gap. The handle was down, but it hadn't caught. It looked closed, unless you were standing right next to it. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my voice steady. I told him I hadn't touched it. He frowned, stepped outside to check the yard, then came back in, shaking his head. The fence was still latched, nothing disturbed. No footprints in the dirt, no broken lock, nothing missing from the house. My mom suggested I might not have shut it all the way after school. It was possible. I'd never been careful with that door. I thought about the footsteps then, hovering on the edge of mentioning them. But the house looked so normal. The lights were on. Air felt ordinary again. Bringing it up would have turned it into something bigger than it was, so I let it go. Years later, I've tried to replay that afternoon logically. Maybe the door had been cracked the whole time. Maybe the wind shifted it. Maybe the footsteps were just the frame settling as the sun moved across the roof. But I've lived in other houses since then. It doesn't move in steady, evenly spaced steps.
Story 2.
Story 2. The phone call. The second time something happened, I was a little younger. Maybe 8. My parents had run out to pick up takeout, and I was told they'd be back in 20 minutes. It wasn't the kind of home alone that felt serious. The sun was still up. The house lights were on. I was sitting at the kitchen table drawing, the TV murmuring faintly in the next room. The landline rang. That sound used to be sharp. Not the gentle buzz of a cell phone, Ann. Actual ring that cut through the house. I remember jumping a little, then laughing at myself before picking it up. Hello? Nothing. Not static. Not silence exactly. Just a faint, uneven sound, like someone breathing too close to the receiver. I waited a few seconds, then hung up. I told myself it was a wrong number. Telemarketers used to auto-dial back then. Sometimes there'd be a delay. I went back to my drawing and tried not to think about it. It rang again less than a minute later. This time I hesitated before answering. I don't know why I picked it up at all. Maybe because I thought it might be my parents calling to say they'd be late. I pressed the receiver to my ear more cautiously. Hello? The breathing was clearer, slow in, slow out. No background noise, no TV behind them, no car sounds. Just air moving through someone's nose or mouth, close enough that it distorted slightly against the speaker. Who is this? I asked. Nothing changed. It's no words, no laugh, just the same steady breath. I remember staring at the phone for a few seconds, like it might ring again just to prove a point. My chest felt tight, but I kept telling myself it was a prank. Kids in school used to do that. Call and say nothing. It wasn't impossible. The phone rang a third time. The sound felt louder now, even though it wasn't. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. I don't know what made me pick it up again. Maybe I thought if I confronted it properly, it would stop. "Stop calling," I said, trying to sound older than I was. The breathing paused, just for a second, then it resumed. I didn't wait after that. I pulled the cord from the wall. The ring cut off mid-cycle. The kitchen went quiet in a way that didn't feel better. I stood there, holding the disconnected receiver, listening to nothing, and wishing I hadn't answered the first time. Someone knows I'm alone. I should have left the phone unplugged. That's the part I replay the most. After a few minutes of silence, the kitchen felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. I told myself I was overreacting. If it was a prank, unplugging the phone meant they'd just keep trying later, so I plugged it back into the wall. It rang almost immediately, not even a full second after the cord clicked into place. I remember my hand hovering over the receiver, my pulse loud in my ears. I picked it up slower this time. I didn't say hello. For a moment, there was nothing. No breathing, no movement. Then, very softly, someone whispered my name. Not my full name. The shortened version my parents used, the one teachers didn't. It was quiet, almost careful, like they were testing it. My whole body went cold. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt locked. The voice didn't repeat it. It didn't say anything else. The line stayed open for another few seconds, then went dead. At the exact same time, the TV in the living room shifted into static. The picture snapped from whatever cartoon had been playing to gray noise. That sharp hiss filled the house, louder than the phone had been. I remember standing there, staring toward the living room doorway, trying to make sense of both things happening at once. The timing felt intentional. I turned off the TV. The static cut out, leaving the house in a silence that felt exposed. I suddenly became aware of every window, every thin pane of glass facing the street. The front porch light was off. The curtains were open. I don't know why my mind jumped to it, but I became convinced someone was outside, watching, waiting for me to look. I moved through the house quickly, flipping off lights as I went. The darker it got, the safer I felt, even though that doesn't make logical sense. I crouched down behind the couch, where I could see the front door without being seen easily from the street. I stayed there until I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway. When I told them, my dad checked the call history on the landline. No missed calls, no recent numbers. He suggested maybe I'd imagined the nickname that prank callers sometimes guessed, but I know what I heard, and I still don't know how they knew to say it then. The missed detail for a long time, I convinced myself the nickname didn't matter. It's easy to rationalize things when you're young. Maybe I'd mentioned it at school. Maybe someone overheard my mom call me that in the front yard. Kids repeat things without thinking. Information travels in small neighborhoods faster than you realize. But when I got older, I started thinking about it more carefully. Very few people actually used that name. Teachers didn't. Friends didn't. It wasn't written on anything. It was something my parents used at home and occasionally my grandparents. It wasn't secret exactly, just personal, contained. Years later, when I was in high school, one of our neighbors was arrested. Not for anything directly connected to us. It was unrelated, something involving surveillance and harassment in another part of town. I don't want to exaggerate it. He wasn't some movie villain hiding in plain sight. He was quiet, kept to himself, mowed his lawn on Sundays. But I remember the police cars parked outside his house and the way the curtains were drawn for weeks afterward. I don't have proof he ever called our house. I don't even know if he knew my name. I just know that when I heard about the arrest, the memory of that whisper came back clearer than it had in years. It still hasn't blurred with time.
Story 3.
Story 3. The backyard light, the third incident, happened when I was around 12, old enough to be left in charge for a few hours. My parents were at a work event, and I was babysitting my younger sister. She was asleep upstairs by 9. The house felt larger when I was responsible for it. Like the walls had stretched outward just to remind me I was the only one paying attention. We had installed a motion light above the backyard, after a string of minor break-ins in the neighborhood. It wasn't dramatic, just car doors left unlocked, tools disappearing from sheds. Nothing violent. Still, my dad liked the idea of extra light. I was sitting at the kitchen table again, same spot as years earlier. I kept watching a show while scrolling through my phone. The dog was lying near the sliding door, chin resting on his paws, barely moving. The backyard light snapped on. It was sudden and bright, washing the fence and part of the lawn in white. I looked up automatically. Through the glass, I could see the usual shapes or patio furniture, the grill cover shifting slightly in the breeze. Nothing was moving. I waited a few seconds, expecting to see a raccoon or a cat dart along the fence line. Sometimes stray animals cut through yards at night. That's what the light was for. After about 30 seconds, it shut off. I went back to my phone. A minute later, it turned on again. This time I stood up and walked closer to the door, careful not to step directly in front of it. The yard looked exactly the same. The gate was closed. The fence didn't rattle. The trees at the back barely moved. The dog didn't react. That was the part I noticed, but chose to ignore. Normally, he barked at everything. Passing cars, wind, the sound of the mail slot. But he stayed still, ears relaxed, breathing steady. If there'd been an animal out there, he would have at least lifted his head. The light clicked off again. Told myself the sensor was probably too sensitive. Maybe a moth flew past it. Maybe heat from the house triggered it. Technology glitches. That explanation felt comfortable enough. Then it turned on a third time. I didn't move right away. I just stood there in the kitchen watching the yard glow and then settle back into darkness, trying to convince myself that if something were truly wrong, it would look obvious. It would announce itself. Instead, it kept looking ordinary, and that made it harder to trust. The shadow near the fence, the fourth time the light came on, I was already standing near the door. It flared across the yard again, bleaching the fence in that harsh white glow. And this time something interrupted the pattern of it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of shadow. The grill cover cast a long shape toward the fence. Tree branches made uneven lines across the wood panels. But as I narrowed my focus, I realized there was a vertical shape that hadn't been there before. It was near the back corner, close to where the fence met the neighbor's yard. It wasn't moving. I leaned slightly to the side, trying to change my angle. The shape shifted just enough to confirm it wasn't part of the fence. It was darker than the wood behind it, thicker than a shadow cast by furniture. My stomach tightened. The dog was still quiet. I reached for my phone, suddenly aware of how exposed the glass door felt. I stepped back a little so my reflection wouldn't give me away. I tried to call my dad. No signal. One bar flickered and disappeared. I moved toward the center of the kitchen. Nothing. The backyard light switched off. For a split second, I felt relief. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe my eyes had filled in a gap and created a person where there wasn't one. Then the light turned on again. The shape was still there. Closer to the fence now. Or maybe I was imagining that part. It's hard to say. The distance was small enough that even a step would have changed the outline. My first instinct was anger, not fear. Just this irrational urge to open the door and confront whoever it was. To prove I wasn't a kid who could be scared away by someone standing in the dark, I actually reached for the handle. I remember my hand closing around it. The slight lift required to disengage the faulty latch. I could picture stepping out onto the patio, the light framing me instead of them. For a second, that felt empowering. Then I thought about my sister asleep upstairs. The idea of leaving the threshold, even for a moment, suddenly felt reckless. I didn't know who was on the other side of that fence. I didn't know if they were alone. Didn't know why they weren't moving, and the dog still hadn't barked. I let go of the handle. Instead of stepping outside, I pulled the sliding door tighter against the frame and locked it properly this time. I checked the side door to the garage, then the front door. I turned off the kitchen lights so I couldn't be seen easily from outside. When I looked back at the yard, the light had gone dark again. The fence looked empty. I never saw the figure leave. Police response: I called my parents before I called anyone else. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I told them there had been someone in the backyard. I didn't dramatize it. I just said I'd seen a person near the fence and that the motion light kept triggering. My dad told me to lock myself in the house and stay on the phone while he called the police. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. By then, the yard looked completely normal again. The light hadn't turned on since. The dog was pacing now, restless in a way that felt delayed. One officer walked the perimeter of the fence with a flashlight, while the other asked me to describe what I'd seen. Kept it simple, a figure standing still, near the back corner. The officer at the fence called something out quietly. When we stepped outside together, I could see a slight disturbance in the dirt just inside the fence line. Not a clear footprint, just scuffed soil where the ground had been smooth earlier that day. One of the wooden panels leaned slightly inward, like it had taken weight. Probably a prowler, one of them said. Calm, matter of fact. Happens more than people think. They didn't find anyone in the surrounding yards. My parents were shaken but relieved. The word probably seemed to comfort them, probably just passing through, probably checking for unlocked doors. But what stayed with me wasn't the possibility of someone hopping the fence. It was how long they'd stood there without moving.
Story 4.
Story 4. The camera incident setup. The last incident happened when I was 13. By then, my parents trusted me enough to leave me overnight. It wasn't common, but they had a wedding out of town and didn't want to drag me along. I insisted I'd be fine. I even liked the idea of an entire evening to myself. No babysitting responsibilities, no early bedtime. A few months earlier, my dad had installed a basic indoor security camera in the hallway that faced the front door in the base of the staircase. It wasn't anything advanced, just a small device mounted high in the corner with a live feed you could check from an app. He told me it was more for peace of mind than anything else. That night, it felt like an advantage. The house layout was simple. Front door opened into a narrow entryway, stairs rising to the left. Straight ahead was the hallway where the camera sat, angled just enough to capture anyone entering or moving between rooms. The kitchen and living room were further back, and the sliding door to the yard was still there, still temperamental. I made sure everything was locked before my parents left. I even double-checked the camera feed on my phone to prove I knew how it worked. Image was clear, bright, ordinary. After they drove away, the house didn't feel threatening. It felt quiet in a controlled way. I ordered food, watched TV upstairs in my room, and checked the app once or twice just because I could. Seeing the empty hallway on my screen made me feel strangely reassured. It was like having an extra set of eyes. Around midnight, I turned off most of the lights downstairs before heading to bed. The camera's night mode switched on automatically, bathing the hallway in a faint grayscale glow. I remember thinking, as I plugged in my phone, that nothing could really happen without me knowing. That was the comfort technology gave me. Motion alert. I must have fallen asleep for an hour, maybe 2. The notification sound woke me. Wasn't loud, just the soft chime from my phone on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, still half in a dream, and saw the banner across the top. Motion detected. Hallway camera. For a second I assumed it was nothing. The system had triggered before when headlights passed through the front window or when the air vent kicked on. I tapped the notification anyway. The live feed loaded slowly. The hallway appeared in gray night vision, slightly grainy but clear enough. The front door was closed, the staircase empty, no movement. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Probably a glitch, I muttered to myself. As I was about to lock my phone, the image flickered. Just for a split second, the screen distorted into horizontal lines before stabilizing again. The hallway looked the same, then another notification popped up. Motion detected. Hallway camera. Shh. My chest tightened in a way that felt disproportionate. I hadn't heard anything downstairs. No doors, no glass. Just the faint hum of the house. The feed glitched again, more noticeably this time. The right side of the frame warped, like the pixels had been dragged sideways. For a moment less than a second, I thought I saw a darker shape. The almost mistake I told myself the Wi-Fi going out explained everything. It was late. Routers reset, signals dropped, cameras froze. There were logical reasons for all of it. I repeated that in my head while staring at the buffering icon on my phone, waiting for the feed to come back. It didn't. Connection failed. I slid out of bed slowly, keeping my movements quiet, even though I didn't know why. The hallway outside my room looked darker than usual through the crack beneath my door. I hadn't left any lights on downstairs, so the only illumination should have been the faint glow from the street filtering in through the front window. I stepped closer to the door. If someone had come in, I would have heard it. The front door had a distinct click when it opened. The stairs creaked in 2 specific spots. I knew this house well enough to navigate it in the dark. My hand rested on the doorknob. Part of me felt embarrassed for hesitating. I was 13, not a child hiding from imaginary monsters. Camera could have glitched because of an update. The motion alert might have been triggered by nothing at all. I turned the knob slightly. The latch clicked softly. That's when I heard it. It was faint, almost too subtle to register at first. Not a footstep, not movement against the floor. Just the sound of air being pulled in and released. Slow, controlled, close. Enough that it didn't echo. Breathing, I froze with the door barely cracked open. The sound wasn't inside my room. It was just beyond it. For a second, I convinced myself it could be my imagination. The way silence amplifies your own pulse until it feels external. I held my breath to test that theory. The breathing continued. Inhale, exhale. Not rushed, not panicked, just steady. My phone vibrated in my other hand. I glanced down instinctively. Camera offline. The app had stopped trying to reconnect. I eased the door back into place without making a sound. My heart was beating hard enough that I was certain whoever was outside could hear it. The closet was 3 steps to my left. I moved carefully, avoiding the loose floorboard near the foot of my bed. I slipped inside the closet and pulled the door shut, leaving a narrow gap so I could see a sliver of the room. I locked my bedroom door from inside with the small turn latch I'd never used before that night. Then I waited. The breathing didn't move closer. It didn't move away. It just stayed there, patient, on the other side of a door I almost opened. Morning evidence, I stayed in the closet until I saw daylight under my bedroom door. At some point, the house had gone completely silent again. I don't remember hearing the breathing stop. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember the gray tone of early morning replacing the black. When my parents' car pulled into the driveway, the sound felt unreal, like something layered over a dream. I waited until I heard my dad unlock the front door before stepping out of the closet. The hallway downstairs looked exactly the same as it had on the frozen camera feed. But the front door wasn't. There were thin scratch marks near the lock. Not deep gouge, just shallow lines in the paint, clustered around the handle as if something metal had scraped against it. My dad ran his fingers over them without saying anything at first. Then he checked the garage. The side door that led from the garage into the house was closed, but it wasn't latched properly. It sat a fraction of an inch open, similar to the sliding door years earlier. My parents were certain they'd locked it before leaving. We pulled up the camera footage together. Everything before midnight was intact. Clear video of me walking downstairs, turning off lights, heading back to my room. Then the motion alerts. Then distortion. And then a block of corrupted data where the file wouldn't load at all. The police came. They took photos. They noted the scratches. They said it looked like someone might have tested the lock with a tool, but hadn't forced it fully. Nothing was taken. No one was found. Something had been close enough to leave marks behind. Lingering effects, none of those nights ended with sirens or headlines. We didn't move. Didn't install floodlights on every corner of the house. Life continued. The way it always does after something unsettling, quietly, without ceremony. But I changed in ways that felt small at first. I check locks more than I need to. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. Sometimes 4. I'll walk away from the door, sit down, and then get back up just to test the handle again. It's automatic now. I don't even think about it until someone points it out. I don't answer unknown numbers. If a call comes in without a name attached to it, I let it ring. If they really need me, they'll leave a message. Most don't. I tell myself it's just common sense, but I know where that habit started. Silence bothers me more than noise. A quiet house used to feel peaceful. Now it feels like something waiting. I sleep better with a fan running or a television low in the background. Complete stillness feels unfinished, like it's holding its breath. The strange part is that none of those houses were isolated. They weren't abandoned farmhouses miles from town, or ordinary suburban homes in neighborhoods full of families and porch lights and trimmed lawns. Nothing about them suggested danger. Which is probably why I still think about those nights, because everything looked normal. Ambiguous closing reflection, I don't have a clean ending for any of this. No one was ever caught in our backyard. No charges were filed because of a phone call. The camera footage never recovered. The scratches on the door were painted over. Life moved on in the practical way it always does. If you lay the events out on paper, they look disconnected. Faulty latch, a prank call, a motion sensor reacting to nothing. Wi-Fi dropping at the wrong time. Each one has a reasonable explanation on its own. That's what makes it hard to categorize. There was never a masked figure standing in the hallway. I never saw someone's face pressed against the glass. There was no dramatic confrontation where everything became clear. Just small moments where something felt slightly misaligned. A step where there shouldn't have been one. A whisper that knew too much. A presence that stayed just outside the light. Maybe they were coincidences. Maybe every house has nights like that, and most people forget them. Or maybe someone tested the edges of our home more than once, checked a door, waited in the yard, listened outside. A bedroom man decided, for whatever reason, to walk away. I still don't know which possibility unsettles me more.